Great. Just if anyone in the background has any issues with the technical things, I know we're testing the Q&A and the live stream, just let us know. And good afternoon, folks. I see we've already got 36 people here. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. We're just doing a couple technical support testing items. Okay. Great to see so many people. Welcome, folks. Welcome to the Puget Sound Energy public webinar. We'll be getting started right at noon, so in 2 minutes from now, and we are live streaming and recording today. And so just know that if you do have to step away or you missed something or would like to revisit it, we will have that opportunity. And I see the YouTube streaming is live, so welcome, folks. We will be getting started in about 1 minute. All right, well, it's right at 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and start welcoming folks and getting started. First of all, welcome to the March 17th Puget Sound Energy public webinar, where we're going to be focusing on how PSE plans for a clean energy future. They're also going to talk about how they balance priorities and planning for multiple possible futures. So happy St. Paddy's Day too, also to folks that celebrate. Excited to be doing this over the lunch hour with all of you. So thank you for spending your time with us. My name is Annie Hilberg-Smith, and I'm going to be facilitating today's meeting with my colleague, Ben Relampagos from Triangle Associates. We're about to just get started into the content. I wanted to let you all know, though, we are recording this meeting and it is live streaming on YouTube today, so it can be viewed after today by visiting PSE's YouTube channel. Ben, if you don't mind putting that into the chat for folks. Note that this webinar is part of a 2-part series that we have scheduled for today, and then one on March 20th. That's this Thursday at 5:30 in the evening for those that daytime does not work for you. So feel free to register and attend that as well. As we get started, please know that we are going to be asking you all to use the chat and reactions bar to interact with us a bit today. We have a large group, which we're really excited about. So we'd love to see some of you put your thoughts, questions, and reactions in the chat and in the reactions bar as we go. Puget Sound Energy is really excited to be offering such a widely attended webinar. We are hoping to use the Zoom webinar platform today by having a really interactive and engaging format, while also acknowledging that we've only done a few of these so far with such large groups. So please feel free to provide us with your feedback on how this goes for you, and we're always open to your suggestions on how we can make this even more interactive and engaging. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can today as possible, and we want to encourage you to use the Zoom engagement features as we request it throughout the next hour together. And so we'll show you what that looks like. You can go to the next slide, Claire. So this is what your Zoom control bar should look like. There are a couple ways you can engage with each other and us today. First is the Q&A pod. So you can please type any questions in there that you have regarding the substantive pieces of the presentation. Everyone's going to be able to see each other's questions and their names, and you can upvote questions that you want to see responded to. If you want to ask questions anonymously, you can do so, but not in the Q&A pod. You'll have to use the PSE feedback form online, and we can provide that link for you all. There's also a chat function, which is already turned on. So we just ask that you use this chat function really for engaging peer-to-peer or engaging with us on the prompts that we provide, or for needs that you might have on the technology side, or for sharing links. That way it doesn't get too inundated with questions. If you have questions for PSE, we ask you to direct them to the Q&A pod so we can really track those a little bit more seamlessly. And then, of course, you can always use your emoji reactions at the bottom. You can heart something, smiley face something, anything that you like. So we encourage you to do so. And then if you want to use closed captions, all you have to do is press on Show Captions, and then turn the blue tab over to turn on captions. You can select English, as that's the language we are speaking in today, and then you can select your preferred language for the captions to be translated into, whether that be English, or there are an array of other languages for translation. Just know that it isn't a perfect translation always when we're talking about more technical terms or using acronyms. So I'll just remind Puget Sound Energy to try not to use too many acronyms. Okay, next slide. Next slide is going to be some facilitator requests. And this is how we're just hoping you all to conduct with us in this meeting, so we can create a space that's really conducive to engagement and to interaction. So just allowing me to guide the group in the process, really engaging with each other in a constructive and courteous manner. As I already mentioned, using the Q&A pod to share your questions and feedback throughout the webinar. We ask that you keep your questions focused to the topics to really ensure the relevance for today. And then PSE will do their best to answer as many questions as they can. I know we have a really big group today, so if we do not get to your questions today, please just look for a response in the follow-up feedback report. And then for additional input, as I already mentioned, you can use the feedback form or email PSE at the address on the screen. Okay, and I know Ben will probably put those links in the chat for us. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And as always, we always have a safety moment. And I was going to say, as a self-proclaimed clean freak, this one really resonates with me. I get so much satisfaction from a well-organized, freshly clean space. So spring cleaning tips, here we go. We want to remind you to clear the clutter before you start cleaning to avoid tripping hazards or painful stepping on of toys, which happens a lot at my house. Never mix bleach and ammonia. This can be hazardous and toxic. We want to make sure that you follow any product directions to keep your surfaces and yourself in top shape. Watch out for wet floors. We don't want you to slip. And then, of course, cleaning products. Please go ahead and store those safely in a clean, dry, and locked up space away from kids and pets. So thanks for those safety cleaning tips today. Next slide. So for today's presentation and facilitation team, we have a couple folks from PSE and one of my colleagues to help support. So we have got Brian Tyson, who's PSE's Manager of Clean Energy Implementation and Planning, Ray Outlaw, the Manager of Communications Initiatives, and then Virginia Winslow is going to be helping with technical support along with my colleague, Ben Relampagos. And so if any tech questions come up, please feel free to ping one of them. Next slide. This is our agenda for today. So once we get through this introduction piece, Brian will be presenting more information about Puget Sound Energy, how they're going to plan for clean energy future, including balancing priorities and planning for multiple futures. Their presentation is peppered with opportunities for live questions and answers throughout, and will take place over the next hour. We're going to be helping facilitate those questions and answers. And then I will wrap up with any final questions and get us adjourned by 1 o'clock. Any questions about the agenda for today? And I see folks are using the chat function. Great. Okay. And if you do have questions about the agenda, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. As you know, one last reminder before we jump in, PSE is doing a Visa gift card raffle for those that attend one of the 2 sessions this week. The raffle is for $100. and the three winners will be chosen at random and emailed next week. So we wish you the best of luck on that. Next slide. And as I introduce Puget Sound Energy, I'd like, and you can go to the next slide after that, not for Thursday. I'd like for participants to respond in the chat to a question by typing in your answer. What are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? We'd love to see that from you. Just waterfall in as we get started. And as those come in, I'll go ahead and ask Puget Sound Energy, Brian Tyson, to get ready to kick off his presentation. As I mentioned, we have built-in pauses throughout the presentation, Q&A pod, and chat. And so please feel free to use those ways to engage with us. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian to get us started. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Annie. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for being here. We're excited to come back. This is our second webinar. I think many of you were back with us back in the fall, so we're excited to get back together to talk more about this clean energy future and a lot more about this integrated system plan. I'm going to start with a bit of a refresher, as Annie mentioned. Then I'm going to talk about some laying the foundation of some of the balancing of the priorities we need to balance in this transition. And then at the end, I'm going to dive deeper into how we model these various clean energy futures. So a bit deeper into the nuts and bolts. As Annie mentioned, there will be multiple opportunities for feedback and getting some questions answered from you all, and then hearing from you all on some specific questions that we have for you. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. I'm going to start with a refresher. So Claire, if we can go to the next slide. Last time we talked back in the fall of 2024, and we started with this message around CETA, our Clean Energy Transformation Act. And we start here because this really is part of one of the drivers for a lot of this clean energy journey that we're on. So first, we start with the standards, 2025 being coal-free for our electricity portfolio, being carbon neutral in our electric system, and then moving toward 100% by 2045. So these requirements really impact this journey, and therefore they impact the investments that we make as we shift towards this cleaner electric supply over time. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please, Claire? Okay, now not only the requirements that we saw here are going to impact some of those investments, but there are some other impacts, some other potential things that we're seeing in our system as well. So we think about our electric load, our demand. We're seeing an increase in population growth. We see the increase in electric vehicle coming onto our grid. We see a higher demand for some of the commercial and residential cooling, just because we've had some warmer days, warmer summers. All of these things will make an impact on our progress in our journey, but there's also some items that customers may make decisions on, whether it be a voluntary conversion from gas to electric, putting rooftop solar on their homes, things like that. All of those have an impact on this clean energy transition, and it has an impact on how we plan for that future. Now, speaking of plans, Claire, if we can go to the next slide. I think we touched on this last time when we did our webinar, and really what this integrated system plan is doing is it's really bringing in our gas and our electric components together in one holistic, cohesive planning approach to how we look at all of our assets across the company. So we're no longer thinking about the gas function as one entity and the electric function as another. We're really trying to understand what are those interactions between the gas and the electric side, and when those interactions happen, how does it impact our existing infrastructure, or what do we need to do in the future to make sure we have room for building and make room for expansion of that infrastructure that we have today. So what we envision in the end is a plan that looks at our generation, it looks at transmission, looks at distribution, looks at the customer-sided programs and products as well, on both the gas and the electric side, so you can get that full visibility of our future, our clean energy future, I should say. Okay, I'm going to touch a little bit on the next slide, please. Let's talk about what's going to be in the ISP. So again, this is a integrated system plan, and so it's going to be an iterative process, meaning we're going to have to study various instances and try to understand the impacts and the shifts that it will have on some of our existing infrastructure and what plans we need to make for the future as well. Now, the one thing I will say is that this plan that you see is not just not a broad breadth of things that we're going to put out there. We really want to be diligent and specific based on the different time frames. So in the first 4 years, 4 to 5 years, we really want to show some of the details and the granularities of the actions we're going to take. But the further we move out into the 5 to 10 year and the 10 to 20 year range, that's when the specificity becomes less and less, and we have a little more flexibility. And that's a lot related to how we model our multiple futures. And I'm going to talk about modeling those futures later on in this presentation. But what you can expect in this integrated system plan is us talking about some of the short-term actions, some of the medium-term strategies and plans, and then further along, we'll talk about more of those long-term planning needs that we may have in the future. And again, this is really to give us a sense of what is that future going to look like, and what are the things we need to do today to prepare us for these various futures that could happen later on. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please, Claire. All right. So I'm going to wrap up here on this section, and we'll take a couple questions, I think. As you can see here, this is our timeline for moving towards filing that first integrated system plan. We've done a lot of the scoping and data development, and you all heard about that back in the fall. Right now, we're very focused on the modeling and the analysis, making sure we have our inputs, our assumptions all aligned before we start to really dive deep into that analysis. Next year, we'll be really focused on developing the plan. So writing those specific actions, writing the specific strategies that we want to take on over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And then we'll file the plan in 2027. This is a plan that is sought for approval. It will be reviewed by the Washington UTC, and we'll be seeking approval for that as well. Okay, so before we go to questions, Yanni, you want to go ahead and let's go ahead and jump into questions, because I know it's been active on the chat here.
So true. Yeah, Brian, I did ask folks a question like at the beginning to respond to as well. So some of these responses or questions might be kind of in response to that. And then, so just a reminder, folks, if you have a question for PSE, in regards to the substantive content today, please go ahead and pop it in the Q&A pod rather than the chat. The chat can be rather difficult to follow. So what we'll do is go through the Q&A pod one by one, and I can go ahead and take us through the first couple ones. Looks like the first one up is from Thomas Tolliver. Is solar cheaper than fossil fuels? How does its prices compare to fossil fuels?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question, Thomas. I think that's something that we're definitely gonna look at when we get to our modeling. We've got to understand a number of different factors as it comes to the pricing for various resources. So it's not just the fuel cost, it may be the transportation cost, maybe the interconnection cost. And so there's a number of different layers that we have to consider as we go through this exercise. I will say that we've done some studies in our previous integrated resource planning processes. From 2023 was our most recent one, and then our clean energy implementation plan that we did back in 23 and 21 as well, that I think also has some insight to some of the costs that we're seeing for these various resources. But thanks for the question, Thomas.
Thanks, Brian. Okay. So I'll keep us going through some of the other questions that we've gotten through the Q&A pod. One is from Mary Craig. She said, I'm all for reducing costs of electricity and expect it to be clean. What impact does 5G cell service do to the cleanliness?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mary. I think that's something we'll have to go back and consider a bit here. I'm not as familiar, so yeah, we'll have to take that back to consider.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and a lot of questions may not be able to answer today, so we'll try to have those get answers in the feedback report or the summary. So just look out for those. I see another question up ready for Ray. from Elizabeth, I do not remember if in the fall you said if Puget Sound Energy has done any geothermal investigating at Mount Baker.
Yeah, thanks for that, Elizabeth. I don't have a response on geothermal. I'm not aware of any at the moment here, but perhaps that's something we could probably follow up with you all in the feedback forum.
And
Ray, did
Brian, I
you
can
flag
add,
that for you?
Oh, yeah, thanks,
it
Ray.
is geothermal is something that the planning team is considering in the modeling process, but I'm also not familiar with specifics at Mount Baker.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Okay, we've got a couple more and then we'll keep going, Brian. So I'll take just a few more questions before we keep going. So on a plan like this, what time slip do you anticipate, looking at like a timeline?
Yeah, Mark, I appreciate the question. I presume this is about the time slip and the things we put in the plan. Um, I would say that's really part of what we're doing in this ISP is we're really trying to understand what are the range of items that we can do in the 5 to 10 to 20 year, but we also want to be mindful that there may be slitches, there may be materials that get delayed, there may be projects that get delayed as well. And so we need to think about that when we're putting this plan together to provide ourselves some flexibility as well. And honestly, that's a really key part of how we put this plan together. We want to be sure that these are things that are realistic, that these are feasible, action items that we can take. And so the timing of all that will be really critical here.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. It looks like the next one Ray was going to answer. So one from Cam, how does the electrical grid upgrades catch up to the electrical demand with heating, switching to electrical and more electric cars on the road? Ray, is that something you wanted to answer?
Brian, I was just flagging it for Brian to take.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect.
Okay, yeah, happy to. I mean, I think this is the core of why we're doing this integrated system plan, right? We're seeing electric demand go up. We're seeing more EVs come on. We're seeing a lot of the heating come online as well. And so that's really the core part of this integrated system plan is going to do is really look at all these different factors, understand how it impacts the system, and then we need to make decisions on how do we bolster, how do we boost our current infrastructure to make sure that we can continue to serve our customers with safe, reliable energy in the short term and in the long term as well. So I appreciate the question, Cam. That's really getting the heart of where we're trying to go here.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, and I know we have more questions, but we are getting up on our time here for the next section. So Brian, I'm gonna just encourage us to keep going. For now. I know the next section is talking about balancing priorities. So I'll turn over to you to keep us going. And Claire, I think you can go to the next slide.
Excellent. Thank you, Annie. Thanks for that, Claire. Thank you all for the questions. I'm seeing them coming in. So really good questions here. Before we get into modeling multiple futures, I know we said we were going to talk about that later. We got to start with some sort of foundational pieces before we get there, and that is safety, reliability, and at the lowest cost. These are foundational in this planning process. So we're always thinking about the safety of the system. We're always thinking about the reliability and serving all of our customers, and we're always thinking about keeping costs as low as possible. Now, if we can go to the next slide. Now, there are a number of laws, a lot of things that are going on that are really impacting how fast we move in this transition. And so you can see a lot of the big ones listed here. We start with CETA. CETA is the one that we touched on earlier, which is really about our electric supply. Clean Buildings Act, which is really focused on energy efficiency for commercial buildings. CCA, Climate Commitment Act, another one that focuses on greenhouse gas emissions. And the Clean Fuel Standard, I saw some questions earlier about transportation. And so this one is really focused on curbing pollution for transportation. And then more recently, 1589, which is really a driver for this whole integrated resource planning process between the gas and the electric. And so we bring this up because these all have to be considered as we plan for this future, because it has an impact on the different areas of the electric and gas system, and it has an impact on those investments that we make as well. Now, Claire, we can go to the next slide. This is a complex effort here, and it obviously is going to have a number of challenges in trying to meet the state's clean energy and emissions reduction goals, and also to maintain safety, reliability, and keep that at the lowest cost, lowest possible cost. So we know that this is going to have an impact, but again, we remain committed to keeping customer bills as low as possible throughout this transition. And you'll be able to see some of those impacts as we form the next integrated system plan. But if we go to the next slide, we know costs are front and center, right? We hear you. We know that is a concern for many of us, for all of us. We're trying to keep up with a lot of the growing loads, and we talked about that earlier. Also want to continue to meet a reliable system and also remain compliant with the law. But I want to say that we're here to help, right? We have programs in place to help support customers. We have bill discount rate. We have past due bill forgiveness. We have a number of these assistance programs out there, but it's not just on the bill side. We also have other customer plans, customer programs rather, that will help reduce costs, but also help reduce some of your energy usage. So whether that's some of our flex programs from demand response, I'm sure some of you on the call here have gotten some of those text messages or emails or notifications on how to reduce your demand during those peak periods. It could be related to rooftop solar or battery storage. So we are really looking at a broad swath of programs that aren't just for the bills, but also to reduce energy demand as well, because we think that it's all really going to be valuable in this clean energy transition. So all that to say, safety, reliability, and keeping bills as low as possible are the foundation for this integrated system plan. And we also want you all to see those benefits in these various programs and in this transition as well. So I'll pause here to see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Brian. We do have a couple that have come in, so we can go ahead and turn to those. So the one though from Cam, I think we already answered that, so I'm not sure how to dismiss that, but we'll keep going. There's a few others. So one from Rick, what is the long-term plan of support for residential gas users? In other words, will prices go up and will supply remain viable? Will programs be developed to assist replacement of existing equipment for a homeowner to convert to electricity if needed?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rick. I think this is where we want to be really thoughtful in our integrated system plan, is that we are able to, as you mentioned, sort of develop programs to really support customers in this transition, whether it's switching from gas to electric or whatever it may be. And so we would hope that that's the sort of thing that we have spelled out in our integrated system plan. Again, it's going to take time, right? And so you may not see it in the first 5 years, but maybe later on as we get further on down the line. So we will also continue to study some of the impacts of converting customers from natural gas to electricity as well. And so as we do that study, as we perform those studies, we'll have a better sense of, okay, what are the plans, what are the mechanisms we need to put in place to really support customers in that transition? And so whether it's incentives or helping replace or things like that, that's really part of what we're trying to answer in this integrated system plan.
Thanks, Brian. And then there's a couple other questions here. So one from Mark, what's PSE's outlook for power increases into the future?
Yeah.
What percentage rate increase per year?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mark. I believe we are studying right now what the outlook is for those power increases in the future. But when you talk about some of the rate increases, that's a key piece that we want to have in this integrated system plan. We want to be able to talk about what those rate increases look like, so that you all have sort of a tangible feel for what this impact is going to be. So I think, Mark, you're hitting on a point that we want to raise in that final integrated system plan.
Thanks, Brian. And then looks like we had one other question, but I think Virginia is typing that. Just if Virginia, if you could let us know if you'd prefer Brian to answer it live. And if not, then we'll keep us going. Okay, great. Looks like she's gonna just type it out. So Brian, you can keep going.
Okay. Thanks for the Q&A. All right, we're moving along really well here. And you know, this next phase, so this is my sort of third and final phase here. This is where we're going to get a lot of audience participation here. We're going to ask for a lot of feedback in two different areas, and of course we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. But hopefully we can take some time here so you all understand what it is when we talk about modeling or analyzing multiple futures. What we want to do here is we understand that we don't control the future, right? There are certain things though that we want to test, that we want to evaluate, we want to analyze. We think about things like the economy, we think about weather, customer behavior. These are all really big high level things that can really shift how fast and to what scale we move in this integrated system plan. And as we do that, modeling those different futures, we have to think about the risk and the opportunities under those different futures as well. So it's important for us to really understand those pieces early on in this process. So before I go too far, let's go to the next slide, because I want to hear from you all now. In the chat, I believe, we really want to understand what are those factors that you think are likely to impact energy demand in the future. And I saw some of this in the chat earlier, but if we could just take some time now to do that. And Annie, I'm sure you're going to help us get there. But this is really a time for you all to help bring in some more feedback.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so again, just what Brian said, we'd love for you to respond in the chat. So what factors do you think are most likely to impact energy demand in the future? And looks like some folks are already putting their responses in the chat. So electric cars, of course, artificial intelligence, Washington's aggressive policies towards EVs, electric vehicles, that is, almost 100% use of rechargeable devices, appliances, etc. Okay, thanks all. Karen, Chris, and Thomas. Climate change from Margaret. Thanks for that addition. Yes, an increase in electric vehicles, heat pump store usage, and electrification of buildings. Yes, thanks Shirley and Stacy. And then I see some people putting stuff into the Q&A too. So climate change getting worse and artificial intelligence electrical demand. So I'll go ahead and move that question over. Electric vehicles, people moving away from fossil fuels. Yep, the economy and federal government. Growth outpacing new production and aging facilities and infrastructure. The current federal government plans to alternate fuels for generating electric plants. Removing gas appliances, electrification of buildings. Yeah, so lots of great feedback and lots of great responses to think about here. AI data centers. Yep, for sure. Yeah, Brian, any other reflections? And then feel free to keep going.
No, these are really great just to see them all coming in. So you all are clearly thinking about all those different factors ahead, which is really great. And I think that's going to tie really nicely once we get to those slides in a few moments here. Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide, because before we get into the illustration here, we have to take a step back here, because we recognize this approach for planning is very different from what we've done before. As I mentioned earlier, it was mostly sort of the gas side and the electric side, but now we're really blending those two together. And we have to think about these multiple futures in the very long term. So in order to do that, we wanted to provide an example of what we're trying to accomplish, so that you all can sort of get a better feel, more tangible feel of what we're trying to do here. In order to do that, we're going to use an example that hopefully many of you are familiar with. I can't see you all, but I would say raise your hand if you remember going back to school, either as a child or going back to school shopping now as an adult now. And I have little ones. I remember doing that, right? Um, and if you remember going back then, you've got your list of supplies, you've got maybe a list of clothes that you want to have. But there's certain things that are top of mind when you go back to school shopping, right? The first thing is a limited budget. That was just a fact of the matter, right? You had a limited budget on what you could spend and what you could buy, right? The other thing you had to think about was the weather. And you had to think about, well, is it going to be sunny most of the year? Is it going to be snowy on those random chances that we get a snow day? Is it going to rain? It rains here a lot, but how often is it going to rain? How much is it going to rain? And you really had to think about those various scenarios, those various futures, if you will, of weather that really impacted your shopping cart of back to school clothing shopping here you had here, right? And so if we go to the next slide here, this is really what we're trying to do. And as you were thinking about back to school shopping, you know, you couldn't get all the items on the snow list. You couldn't get all the items in the sun and the rain, but you were really trying to get a mix and match of items that could cover the gamut, the spectrum of those futures, right? So you want to be sure you've got something that probably keeps you warm throughout just in case it snows or it's rainy. Or you probably want something that keeps you warm just in case it gets a little too sunny or something to put a sweatshirt over, right? So it's less about deciding a specific future and saying, yes, it's going to be sunny. I'm going to get all my sunny apparel. Yes, it's going to rain. I'm going to get all my rainy apparel. It's really getting a mix and match across the board so that whenever it rains or whenever it's snowy, you've got something to cover you, right? You've got something in your shopping cart that you can pull out and say, all right, it's a little colder today. I can pull that out and it'll help me, right? Hopefully that sort of makes sense to you all. So if we can go, so this is exactly what we're trying to do here is we are trying to understand those various bounds, those bookends, if you will, those futures, to really then shape what is that final integrated system plan going to be that covers the gamut of those different futures. Now, you all talked earlier about the factors that we need to consider, right? And you all listed probably most most of these, probably electrification. I saw EV, AI data centers, policy, right? These are all different factors that we have to consider because there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot that's unknown about these futures, and so we want to be sure that we test those different boundaries, those different bookends, and then understand, okay, how can we make a plan that's going to cover all these different areas that we're testing and consider all the different factors that you have here, okay? So let's go to the next slide because we've sort of started to think about those different futures, those different futures through these draft scenarios. And again, similar to the back to school shopping, right? We've got a really unconstrained electrification. So we can see a scenario where you get really, really high electric growth, you get really, really high gas load reduction, which means there's going to be a really high electric system investments, right? You're going to need a lot of investment to meet that demand. But we also want to test bookends where maybe we have not so much load growth and maybe a modest net gas growth, right? That's probably going to require a little less of the electric investments, right? And then we probably have some things in between there where we have customers who are very, very focused and very energized about moving from gas to electric, or you may have incentivized programs. I think as Rick or Mark talked earlier about some of the incentives or programming that PSE may have to help move from gas to electric, right? All these are really different futures that are going to have really different impacts on the investments that we make, the time that it takes, and the plan that we put together, right? But just like back to school shopping, where you had to think about, is it going to be sunny? How many sunny days am I going to have? How many wintry days am I going to have? Similar to this scenario, we have to think about those different futures to really pull together that mix and match approach of an integrated system plan here. And so that is truly what we're trying to do here, is study the spectrum of what could be, try to piece together a plan that hopefully covers us through those different futures so that we can have a fully integrated system plan here. Okay, I've got one more question for the audience. No, Annie has one more question. Sorry, go ahead, Annie.
Oh, no, go for it. We're going to go to the next slide. And
Yeah,
I'm
we're going to
happy
go
to
to the next
introduce
slide.
this.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Brian, before you go to the next slide, there's a question that came in the chat, but I think you can probably answer it here. And it's, I don't see resource development on your slides. Is PSE going to develop energy sources or just purchase energy from suppliers?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I believe it's from Lauren.
Yes.
So Lauren, thanks for that. I have to go back to, we have to study it all, right? There's going to be a mix and match approach, right? Because of a couple of things: safety, reliability, lowest reasonable cost, right? So we have to think about the resources, whether it be self-built, whether it be a developer, PPAs, things like that. We got to think about cost. We got to think about reliability and safety. And so when you see that integrated system plan, you will understand that there's probably a study of a various different ways we could go about, and there may be a mix of different ways that we develop those resources, or there may be a different mix of how those resources show up in the plan, that it could be in these different buckets that you mentioned here. And so that is definitely a critical part of putting together that plan. That's a feasible, actionable plan for the future. Thanks for that question, Lauren.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and so we're at our kind of second feedback opportunity. Would love to just hear from all of you in the chat, and feel free to have your responses come in through Waterfall. That we put the question in the chat, and I'll go ahead and read it out loud. What factors are most important to you when thinking about the future of our energy system? So I see Chris said reliability. From Elizabeth, there's a couple other things: reliability and stable cost, limited volatility, the environment, cost, of course. Yes, thank you all for your responses. Looks like cost is on top of everyone's minds. Clean energy, of course, Margaret. The impact on climate change, incentives to reduce electrical use. Forced elimination of gas, yes.
Mm-hmm.
The economy and federal government, reliability. So yeah, lots of good reflections here. Getting off fossil fuel as soon as possible, strengthening transmission and other infrastructure. So, yeah, so some really great reflections, and feel free to keep popping those in as you continue to think about those. And of course, if you have any questions for Brian on the content of this, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A. I'll just read off a couple more suggestions, and then I'll toss the ball back to you, Brian. So storage of power to the grid developed from solar and wind systems. And yes, of course, basic costs. We've seen that a lot. So yeah, Brian, do you want to keep us going on this? Or it looks like there is a question too, but it looks like Virginia's answering that. So I won't pause for that one.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Annie, thank you all for this. This is it's great to hear, and great to see the sort of repetition of certain ones, like costs I saw come up a lot. Federal government impacts, I saw that come up a lot. Reliability, of course. You know, some of these are like very tied to the priorities we talked about earlier, right? So I'm glad that we're all aligned with some of those priorities as we make this integrated system plan here. Okay, I think any questions on the visual or the illustration? I'm really hopeful that that gives you all a sense of this sort of complex process that we're trying to put together, and hopefully grounds you in what that final integrated system plan will look like based on the different the gamut or the spectrum of multiple futures that we've looked at. Okay, but I think we're ready to go to Q&A, I believe.
Yeah, Yeah, there's not a ton in the chat or in the Q&A pod. There are a few, so I can go ahead and raise those for you, Brian. Kay was asking, what about putting solar on schools?
Yeah, so I think for solar in schools, there's actually um, we have a current program. Ray, I don't know if you're about to talk about it. Yeah, go ahead. It's like the words are
Brian,
escaping me.
yeah, community solar, I think is
Yes.
the word you're looking for. So yes, we have a program called Community Solar where we're actively looking to put solar projects on buildings like schools, government buildings, et cetera. And then customers can either buy shares or income eligible customers can receive free shares. We can put a link to that program on the website. And you can take a look and get a little more detail.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ray.
Thank you. Yeah, here's one from Julian or Julian. When can we expect a first draft of the ISP to be made available publicly?
Yeah, thanks for that, Julian. We are, I think Ray knows this best. We are counting down towards next summer, 2026. So we expect next summer or fall to have a draft for the public, and this is really key because we want to get that feedback from you all. We're going to have multiple webinars here where we're going to talk and build and build and build towards that final plan. But once we get the draft out there, it's really important that we hear from you all when it comes out next year. So that's when you can expect it later on next year. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, and kind of a related one, will PSE share modeling analysis with the public?
Yeah, thanks for that, Shirley. So there's a couple responses here. One is we have a technical resource planning advisory group, or RPAG, who meets about monthly and will really get into the technical details. And I bring that up because there's opportunity to listen in on those meetings if you are interested to understand the analysis and the modeling and the things that are going on. Okay, so that's one approach. The other one is that we will have some of the analysis available once we file the final report, so that you can really see some of the work papers and spreadsheets to understand all the analysis and evaluation that went on as well. And so I would say there's sort of two opportunities, one in the RPAG, or Resource Planning Advisory Group. And the second one is once we do the filing, we will submit some of those work papers and documents that you can peruse through as well.
Thanks, Brian. Okay. Got a couple more questions ready for responses, Brian. So here's one from Mark. What sources of energy are we considering? Oh no, just move to the top. Sorry. What sources of energy are we considering? Nuclear is making a comeback in the country, but 40 years ago we had that thought.
Yeah, so I would say we're looking at a lot of them, Mark. So wind, solar, geothermal we were studying, some of the small modular we're studying as well. Battery storage, long duration storage. I mean, there's a number of different resources that we're looking at, and also on the demand side, some of the customer side. So you think about rooftop solar, you think about batteries in a home or in a community center. I mean, we're looking at a wide spectrum of renewable resources. But one thing I really want to remind us is that we need to, when we put our plan together, we want to be sure we're putting things that have that technical and feasible, they're technically and feasibly available for us, right? We know there's a lot of research going on out there, but we want to be sure that when we put that plan together, that you see things that, yes, they're grounded. We know these are things that are going to be available for customers, are going to be available for the company to use to help us in this clean energy transition.
Thanks, Brian. I'll keep us going with questions if that's okay. Another one from Mark is there enough solar exposure in Western Washington to make it feasible?
Ray, are you gonna? I can touch on it.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. So, Mark, I would say that we need to continue to study renewables across our region. and maybe not specifically for Western Washington. We know that sun is really great on the eastern side of the mountain. We know that wind is really great in other regions as well. And so while there may not be enough in this particular region, we are really focused on looking at the full region as a whole. Rather, there may not be enough on this side of the state, but we need to be focused on the full region as a whole, and being able to bring in clean, non-emitting resources from across our area.
Thanks for that response. Ray, did you have anything to add? I saw you take yourself off mute.
Annie, I just wanted to kind of tie it to the next question too, where Chris Jersey asked about the various sources that we will use for generation, and he included some numbers about from BPA data. Anyway, I think just to reinforce your comment, Brian, I think we're looking at resources, in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Quite far from our region, actually, thousands of miles, to access as much clean resources as we can and offset that variability of resources, because as folks have noted, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, right? So how do we have a system of the future that accommodates that variability is exactly what the ISP is intended to look at.
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
Okay, we've got a couple more, if that's okay. So another question here is, what is the greatest challenge Puget Sound Energy faces in meeting the 2030 carbon neutral standard under the Clean Energy Transformation Act?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Julian. I go back to what we talked about earlier, Julian, which is trying to balance safety, reliability, and meeting these requirements at the lowest cost for customers. I think that is the challenge because of the complexity of the problem. Trying to continue to keep bills as low as we can and also continue to keep the grid reliable. That is the challenge. And that's why it's a key priority for us, because we recognize that that is core to what we do. So we just have to continue to figure out ways and talk to customers and have these type of discussions so that we can together build this integrated system plan. So Julian, I really appreciate the question there, because that really just brings it back to really what really drives what we're doing here.
Thanks, Brian. And there's a question after that asking about how our power grid relates to Canada's.
Oh, thanks for that, Shirley. So we do have connection to Canada. We have some resources that we purchase from Canada as well, and so there's a tie there, and so we'll just have to continue to monitor those ties and monitor those relationships and partnerships that we have with our friends up north there, especially in this integrated system plan. You'll see in the modeling some of the various aspects of resources for Canada, both on the gas and electric side.
And then there's a question. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, I'm reading as well, so go ahead, Andy.
Okay, no worries. There's a question on Thomas. I'm not sure if I fully understand it. It says, isn't there a billing department that has already determined the correct price for things like solar in Western Washington? Not sure if I fully understand that question.
I'm not
Brian?
Sure either, Thomas, but yeah, I'm not quite sure on that. So we may have to get back to you, Thomas, on that, or if you could clarify what it is you're thinking about in terms of the correct price for solar.
You put at the bottom, haven't accountants already determined the price?
Oh, and I believe, Thomas, this may refer to some of the work that's been going on with our with the WUTC, some of those efforts there. I do not have an exact answer on that, and so we may have to bring in one of our subject matter experts to answer that in our feedback form later on. But I think you want to know the price per watt. Okay.
Per watt.
Yeah. I think we may have to look into that, Thomas.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, we'll try to get that included in the feedback summary. Looks like Virginia, you're answering the next one, so I won't touch on that. And yeah, thanks, Thomas. And then so next question from Mark, are you concerned with the trend with isolationism in going out hundreds of miles or thousands of miles to get energy?
Ooh, thanks for that question, Mark. I think there's risk in a lot of these various solutions. So whether it be resources way out further across the country or resources here locally, and I think we have to consider those risks just like we consider the risk in any type of acquisition, any type of generational resource that we bring into our portfolio. And so I think there's some risk or concern with sort of going out very far because of the transmission costs and because of the integration costs, because it is physically far away, but there's also some benefits that may be there as well. And so we're going to have to balance those risks and benefits as we put together a full plan. But appreciate the question there, Mark.
Thanks, Brian. And I see some comments a comment in the chat from Tom. Thanks for moving that over to the chat, since it wasn't a question, just about their residential solar panels in Western Washington working very well in the long days of summer. Great, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
And I think that gets us to the end of our questions, and we are pretty much right on time. So we're actually 2 minutes ahead, which is always nice. So want to just thank you, Brian, for going through all those presentation slides and answering all the questions. I know we have a couple more slides to just share some resources with this group. So Brian, I think you were going to cover those.
Yeah, I can do that. And thank you all for the questions. These are really great, thoughtful questions. So I appreciate the dialogue here. As we wrap up here, a number of ways to get involved from our ISP website itself. You can join our mailing list. Obviously, you all are great about providing comments. And also, I mentioned before the RPAG, our Resource Planning Advisory Group. That's another great way, especially I saw a couple comments about getting into the details and the technical aspect. That's a great avenue, a great venue to listen in and chime in and provide some feedback. And then obviously, I think it was Lauren who said it earlier about getting the draft ISP. Yes, the draft is going to come, and getting your feedback on that will be really, really helpful as well. And then we'll have more of these webinars in the future as well. All right. And then the next slide, I think we've got some ways to participate. Thank you, Claire. So I talked earlier about some of the bill assistance programming, bill discount rate, bill forgiveness, things like that. And then I also talked about Flex Program, and I think someone in here was participating in Flex Program and hopefully has seen some of the benefits, but a couple other clean energy programs relate to energy efficiency, customer rebate program, and then weatherization as well. Those are items that you today can go out and participate to really help with all these various clean energy transition items. Claire, can you go to the previous slide?
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Yep. And so here's all the programs that I just mentioned.
Thanks, Brian. And then I did see one last question, and since we have just a minute left, Ray suggested we go ahead and have it answered by either you or him. So from Chris, are you confident that contracting for wind power in other states will provide that resource when wind is absent in Eastern Washington? Has the climatology verified this, or is it an assumption?
Yeah, I'll start, Ray, and if I miss anything, feel free to jump in. You know, when we look at some of our wind resources, we get technical wind shapes from them, and so these do come from research that's been done, and so from studies that's been done, and so we have a pretty good understanding of the wind that will happen in a particular area based on the different resource, and so we use that information to help inform the resource selection or the models themselves as we put together this plan. And so even though there may be no wind in Eastern, there may be some in Montana, right? And so we have resources that we've procured or acquired in Montana, right? And so that energy is going to come back. We've got transmission lines that deliver that energy all the way back as well. And so we do have some data that we have a lot of data that helps inform the characteristics or the behavior of wind across the region, right? And I think it's not just will it happen here in this region and not happen over here, but also as you look at building out wind in a particular area, there may be saturation there. So you may think that, oh, we just put a bunch of wind facilities here, but there's actually effects on those wind facilities when they're nearby or when they're around. And so we study that as well so that we understand that all the wind energy that we're planning for is accurate and we have the best available information. So Chris, hopefully that helps answer your question there. Ray, did I miss anything there?
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Ray.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for all of your thoughtful presentation and responses to people's questions, Ray as well, and others from PSE supporting this. I'm going to move us into wrap up so that we can end by 1 o'clock as we promised. So as you've already seen the slide, this is the way you can contact Puget Sound Energy if you would like to email them, provide them with feedback, leave a voicemail, or subscribe to any of the email lists. There's also the website there. So please feel free to use those resources for yourself. Want to just thank you all for your thoughtful questions and engagement. Looking forward to having another one of these on Thursday at 5:30, from 5:30 to 6:30. Just remember today's session was recorded so you can rewatch or share it if you'd like. And just want to thank you again for all your time. Please remember just to stay connected. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up ideas or thoughts. And we want to just tell you to have a wonderful rest of your St. Patrick's Day and taking time away from your lunch to be with us today. And then as one last reminder, we do have a survey poll that you will receive when you press exit or leave this meeting. Oh, thank you for the little 4-leaf clover. That's so cute. And please do not forget to fill that out for us. It's really helpful in how we continue to update the engagement approaches for engaging the public on this topic. So feel free to fill that out and we'll be reviewing those results and using that to help inform our next set of public meetings. All right, well, thank you all, and we will see you hopefully soon. And I'm just loving these 4-leaf clovers. I didn't know that was possible. So I'm going to be telling people to do that all day today.
That's great.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.